Tencum stood in the middle of the bar, looking around but couldn't see Lam Ti anywhere. She pulled Tithi aside and asked, "Do you know where Lam Ti went?" Tithi, surrounded by layers of men, didn't hear Tencum's call. Tencum felt like her friends were going crazy. It was strange. Why did everyone change when they put on those clothes? Shaking her head, Tencum walked out. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her heart, wondering what had happened. She needed to find Lam Ti. She thought Lam Ti might be sitting on the rooftop, so she entered the elevator and saw a long-haired woman crouching inside. The woman was holding her stomach, seemingly in pain from menstrual cramps. Her face wasn't visible. Tencum hesitated, thinking about offering help, but the elevator felt stifling, making her anxious. Then she reconsidered. After all, every woman experiences pain during that time of the month, including herself. Perhaps the woman just needed a moment to rest. She pressed the rooftop button, and the elevator clanged before it started moving upward. Tencum felt cold. Suddenly, the elevator stopped, and the woman slowly stepped out, her hair cascading down her back. Tencum still couldn't see her face. Curiously, she glanced at the 13th floor. Several people were standing outside, as if waiting to go down, all of them staring blankly at her. Tencum wondered what kind of strange place this was, where everyone seemed so soulless. The woman moved very slowly, forcing Tencum to repeatedly press the open button to keep the elevator doors from closing. Just as the woman was about to exit, she leaned over and whispered, "Thank you. Welcome to the 13th floor." Tencum politely smiled back. Watching her leave, Tencum felt a strange familiarity. The rooftop was empty, and she wondered where everyone had gone. She stood in the empty space, cursing Lam Ti under her breath. That damn girl. Where the hell is she now? Bored, she watched the elevator numbers change. Suddenly, she noticed there was no 13th floor in the elevator. Thinking it was a malfunction, she asked the hotel staff with her, "Why isn't there a 13th floor button in the elevator?" The hotel employee looked at her quizzically before asking, "Why do you ask?" "Oh, I just saw a woman go to the 13th floor. If there's no button, how will she get back down?" The staff member looked at her from head to toe, as if she were a monster or had just told a lie. Confused, Tencum asked again, "What's wrong?" The staff member coldly replied, "The 13th floor used to house a company, but for some unknown reason, it seemed haunted. Several people died there, all from jumping off the building. The building management was so scared that they closed off the 13th floor. To prevent guests from accidentally entering, we decided to remove the 13th floor button from the elevator." Tencum responded, "But I just saw a woman go up to the 13th floor, and there were many people there as well." The staff member replied without hesitation, "Miss, you probably encountered a ghost. You should see a psychiatrist." Tencum felt a headache coming on. She had clearly seen the woman go to the 13th floor. Why is what I saw with my own eyes being dismissed as a lie? She thought. As soon as she exited the elevator, she noticed a commotion outside and felt uneasy, wondering, could something have happened? "I heard someone died in the hotel room," someone whispered, feeling uneasy. She immediately called Auntie Tithi. She quickly ran up to investigate. Look, 2 men arrived at the hotel, where nearly all the best police officers in the department were already present. Given that the victim was the chairman of the largest diamond store in the city, it made sense for the police to respond quickly. Additionally, it was a gruesome case. When he had heard the director's trembling voice over the phone earlier, he had been suspicious. The director, who was set to retire next year, had dealt with all sorts of brutal cases, so why was he so terrified this time? Upon arrival, his colleagues greeted him. Despite not yet being 30, he was one of the top crime solvers, achieving feats that could be counted on one hand. Although he had made many significant contributions and won numerous awards, Luk Tumin was a stubborn man who didn't care much for fame or fortune. His passion for his job was driven solely by the desire to solve every case. The room was clean, with no signs of struggle or blood. Crime scene was far from what he had imagined. The lighting in the room was warm, everything was quiet and comfortable, creating a peaceful atmosphere. However, his professional instincts told him that this was not the crime scene. He entered the bathroom where many people were gathered, including the forensic staff, were taking notes. Photographers and fingerprint technicians were working, while the hotel staff member who had discovered the bloody scene was sitting on the sofa outside, trembling and unable to answer any question. Wearing gloves, he stepped into the bathroom. Inside was the body of a man lying on the floor, and a woman's body leaning against the mirror. Both of their eyes had been gouged out. The murder weapon, a bloody blue toothbrush, was lying not far from the woman's hand, still covered in tiny pieces of flesh. What disturbed him the most were the 4 gouged-out eyes floating in the hotel's water container. After removing them, the killer had even cleaned them under the tap before placing them in the container. Never before had he felt so unsettled. Stepped back and bumped into Tungo behind him, who remarked, "Isn't it strange? The eyes seem alive, scaring us all out of our wits. Staff here can't stand it for long. They keep running outside to catch their breath, while the eyes keep moving. It's terrifying." Look, 2 men gestured for Tungo to stop talking. He re-entered the bathroom. The woman's body was pressed against the mirror. Her face must have been filled with terror at the moment of death, causing her muscles to stiffen and freeze in that position. A forensic officer carefully pulled the body away from the mirror. Seeing her chest, the officer gasped in horror, which was unusual for someone in his profession, indicating that this was no ordinary sight. Look, 2 men felt dizzy. He saw that the woman was wearing a blood-red yim, traditional Vietnamese undergarment for women, but no, it wasn't the yim. It was her own skin. The skin on her chest had been cut away, leaving only exposed muscles in the shape of a yim. After examining the body, the forensic officer speculated, this woman gouged out her own eyes, then used the toothbrush to gouge out the man's eyes before finally cutting the skin on her own chest. Both died from blood loss. I still wonder how she managed to do all this in such extreme pain. Photos had already been taken, and the hotel cameras showed no one entering the area. This confirmed the forensic officer's conclusion that it was a suicide. Just as Look 2 Min was about to wrap up and head back to the station for further research, a panicked woman burst in. He caught her and looked into her tearful, beautiful eyes. Overcoming her fear, she asked, "Did a murder happen here? Is the victim Lam Ki?" He helped her up. Seems she knew the victim. 2 more women came running up behind her, shouting, "And come, don't run so fast. You didn't even wait for the elevator." Another one added, "Did you find out? Did something happen to Lam Ki?" All 3 women were dressed fashionably, one wearing a stunning red sleeveless qipao that caught everyone's attention. The woman who had fallen into his arms stood up straight and said, "I don't know. I was just asking the police." Another woman rushed over, making him momentarily dizzy. "Is it Lam Ki? We are all close friends of Lam Ki. We were together for a while, then she disappeared. After that, we heard something happened at the hotel. The victim's name is Lam Ki, right?" Barrage of questions left him unable to answer immediately. The expressions on their faces suggested they had anticipated this outcome. The woman named Tun Kum gently asked him, "Please, just tell us what happened to Lam Ki." Reluctantly, he replied, "She's dead." The woman wearing a red scarf fainted on the spot. The other 2 rushed to her aid. "Auntie, are you okay?" Luckily, a police car was nearby, so he quickly carried Auntie to the hospital, with Tun Kum and Tithi following behind. Look, Auntie woke up to a pristine white room with the faint scent of disinfectant. Someone was holding her hand. She turned to see that it was Tun Kum. Tithi was standing by the window, gazing out with a sorrowful expression. As Auntie regained consciousness, Tun Kum quickly approached her, asking, "Auntie, are you awake? Do you want some water?" Auntie replied, "Lam Ki, she's really dead, isn't she?" Tun Kum's eyes welled up with tears. Tithi hugged Auntie tightly, trying to comfort her. "Don't think too much about it. It was just an accident." "Who killed Lam Ki?" Auntie asked. "No one killed her. She committed suicide," Tun Kum replied. "Why would Lam Ki kill herself? When we were at the bar, she seemed perfectly fine. How could she just suddenly kill herself?" A warm male voice interrupted. "Yes, that's true. Now that you're awake, may I ask you a few questions?" Auntie looked up to see the policeman who had informed them about Lam Ki's death. He introduced himself. "I'm Look 2 Min, Deputy Chief of the Serious Crimes Unit. I hope you can cooperate with us to help understand this case." Auntie nodded slightly. After taking notes, Look Two Men left the hospital. Girl ran after him, and when he turned around, he saw it was Tun Kum, the girl with the big bright eyes who had collided with him at the hotel. Today she was wearing a long pink dress with her hair down. Tears were still visible on her face. "I want to see Lam Ti one last time. Can you arrange that for me?" Tun Kum asked, her eyes filled with hope. Look Two Men, captivated by her gaze, nodded without saying a word. The weather was cold, and the sudden death of her close friend left Tun Kum feeling desolate. To break the heavy silence, Look Two Men told her a joke as the elevator descended. Once, a doctor and a nurse were working a night shift together. They took the elevator to leave. Midway, the elevator stopped as someone wanted to enter, but the doctor quickly closed the elevator doors. A nurse asked why, and the doctor replied, "Didn't you see? That person had a red string tied around their wrist, just like the ones tied to the wrists of corpses in the hospital morgue." Upon hearing this, the nurse said to the doctor, "A red string like this?" Tun Kum quietly listened and then raised her hand, showing a red string tied around her wrist. "A string like this?" she asked. The sight of the string startled him, causing him to step back. Tun Kum chuckled. "I've worn this string since I was a child to ward off evil spirits." Though Look Two Men had intended to tell a ghost story, it was he who ended up being frightened by Tun Kum. Despite this, he felt a strange happiness at seeing her smile. But her smile quickly faded when she saw Lam Ti's body. Though Tun Kum was usually brave, the sight of Lam Ti's lifeless body made her legs give way, and she collapsed into Two Men's arms. When she saw Lam Ti's exposed chest, she screamed, "The Yim! It's the red Yim!" Indeed, it was the same red Yim. The one Lam Ti had been wearing had been removed and placed at the bottom of the jar, which now held her eyes. The jar was still in the forensic lab, with threads of blood-like fibers floating in the water, creating the illusion of a woman's hair. The four eyes inside occasionally bumped into each other as if they were sharing a laugh. Could Lam Ti have really done this to herself? Tun Kum wondered. Yes, Look Two Men replied. Tun Kum remembered that Lam Ti had always been a lively, fashion-forward girl. How could she have turned into this cold, soulless corpse? Was she mad? According to our analysis, she was showering when suddenly she experienced a mental breakdown, leading to the tragedy you've seen. In all the years I've known her, I've never heard of her having any mental issues. I never noticed any unusual behavior either. That's exactly what's puzzling us. There's no record of Lam Ti ever being diagnosed with a mental illness. Her family has no history of it either. We can't understand how she could have suddenly developed such a severe mental disorder. Moreover, she had no enmity with the diamond store owner. In fact, they seemed very close when they entered the hotel. We haven't been able to uncover any clues about the case. Tun Kum pondered for a moment and then asked, "Why did she cut the skin off her own body?" That's another reason why we wanted to talk to you. We're trying to understand why she carved the skin on her chest into the shape of a yim. Seemed she was particularly fond of that yim. Of course she was. Didn't you see that all of us loved that piece of fabric? Tun Kum replied, pulling a red scarf from her bag and showing it to Look Two Men. As he held the scarf, he was entranced by its mesmerizing red color, unable to take his eyes off it. Boy, Lam Ti, Thi, and Ti. Each of us has something made from that fabric. We never imagined that something like this would happen after she wore that yim. It breaks our hearts. Tun Kum said, her voice breaking as she began to cry. As her tears fell onto the scarf, it seemed to emit a faint glow, enchanting her. She picked up the scarf and draped it around her neck, reminiscing about the moment before they went to the bar when Lam Ti had eagerly helped her put it on. They had all been so happy then. Sadly, those joyful times were gone, never to return. Before she could finish wrapping the scarf around her neck, Thi's voice interrupted her thoughts. Tun Kum, come quickly. Anki is starting to say strange things. Tun Kum asked Look Two Men, can you go with her? I want to sit with Lam Ti for a bit. He nodded and, taking Thi's hand, hurried upstairs to Anki's room. The reason Tun Kum asked him to go was because she had just realized that Lam Ti's body in the morgue resembled the woman she had seen on the 13th floor earlier, especially when viewed from the side. No wonder she had found that person familiar. But if Lam Ti was already dead at that time, How could she have appeared in the elevator and gone to the 13th floor, which the elevator didn't even reach? Summoning her courage, Tuncum walked into the morgue and slowly pulled back the sheet covering Lam Ti's face. The sight of those dark, empty eye sockets made her heart race, but she kept looking to confirm whether Lam Ti was indeed the woman in the elevator. Just then, she saw Lam Ti's lips curl into a gruesome smile. Terrified, she stumbled back, but it was too late. Lam Ti's hand had already grabbed hers. Overwhelmed by fear, Tuncum's mind went blank and her body turned cold. Lam Ti sat up, her icy, rigid hand covering Tuncum's mouth as she slowly whispered, "Welcome to the 13th floor." The stench from her decaying face filled Tuncum's nostrils. Desperate to scream, Tuncum backed away and bumped into someone. The person embraced her and gently reassured her, "It's okay now. You're safe." It was Tu Min. He looked at her, silently asking what had scared her so much. Unable to explain, Tuncum led him upstairs to see Anki. When they reached Anki's room, they found her curled up under a blanket, trembling uncontrollably. Tuncum gently pulled the blanket down and spoke softly. "Anki, it's me, Tuncum. Don't be afraid. Are you okay?" Anki peeked out, saw Tuncum, and burst into tears, clinging to her. "I saw Lam Ti. It was really her." Tuncum held her tightly, soothing her. "Don't be scared. You must have been seeing things." Tithi sighed. "My cousin has never experienced anything like this before. This has been too much for her." Anki slumped into Tuncum's arms, sobbing. It was really Lam Ti. She was sitting in a pool of blood in the bathroom, her yams soaked in blood, and she had no eyes. "I saw her. I really did." Tithi rushed over, pleading, "Oh my God, please snap out of it. Don't let your mind play tricks on you. If something happens to you, what will I do?" Tuncum gently patted Anki's back, trying to comfort her. "Don't dwell on it. It was probably just a hallucination. It wasn't real. Don't think about it anymore." After being given a sedative, Anki furrowed her brows and gradually drifted into a fitful sleep. Look, Tu Min offered to drive Tuncum home. Exhausted, she agreed without hesitation. She curled up in the corner of the car, trembling. She still couldn't grasp the reality that her friend, who had been alive and well, suddenly died so mysteriously. She recalled the first time she met Lam Ti, during a job interview at the advertising company where she used to work. She was the recruiter, and one candidate after another had come and gone without leaving any impression. But Lam Ti was different. She stood out. She confidently placed her portfolio on the table and said, "I don't have a degree, but I have talent." And indeed, she later proved her exceptional abilities, excelling in every area of advertising she touched. Lam Ti had a way of convincing clients that was second to none. There were times when Tuncum found herself annoyed with Lam Ti's ruthlessness. But she also understood that in a city like this, where she was on her own, there was no other way to get ahead. After Tuncum resigned, Lam Ti took over her position. As the saying goes, a fight brings people closer, and they became best friends after that. 4 of them had lived in such happiness and peace. Then suddenly, Lam Ti was dead, and Anki had lost her mind. Everything had turned upside down in an instant, like they had fallen from heaven to hell. Tuncum couldn't figure out when their lives had started unraveling. What was the source of all these calamities? With these thoughts swirling in her mind, she buried her head in the back seat, unwilling to think any further. But her worn-out appearance didn't go unnoticed by Tu Min, who kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror. He had never felt such empathy for someone else's pain before. Every move she made affected him deeply. Could this be the love at first sight that novels often speak of? Before long, they arrived at her home, and he reluctantly bid her farewell. He had wanted to invite her out for a meal but felt it might be too forward, so he decided against it. Moreover, the case still had too many unresolved questions, so he returned to the office to review the related file. As he drove away, she felt a warmth inside her. When she opened her door, something black streaked past her and jumped into her bag. Upon closer inspection, she realized it was Hakbao. The cat's fur was puffed up as if it were preparing for a fight with her leather bag, behaving as though it were about to face its greatest enemy. She comforted Hakbao for a while before pouring out some food for it, and casually tossing her bag into the corner of the room. Only then did Hukbao calm down. The sky was already lightening, and she had practically stayed up all night. Exhausted, she collapsed onto her bed and fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up, it was already dusk. Despite her sorrow, going a whole day and night without eating had left her weak with hunger. She opened the door and headed to a restaurant across the street to satisfy her cravings. Just as she was about to leave, Hukbao leaped into her arms, meowing as if begging her to take it along. Tunkum, touched by the little cat's affection, decided to bring it with her. At least she had Hukbao for company. As she walked past a trash can on her way to the restaurant, memories of her encounter with Kowloon flooded back. His annoying face popped into her mind, and she thought how amusing it would be to run into him again now. Dressed as she was, holding a beautiful cat, made her look as sophisticated as a lady of high society. At that moment, the cat in her arms jumped into the trash can she had just passed. Frightened, Tunkum called out to Hukbao, but it had already dived inside. Sighing, she started rummaging through the trash, hoping to find her stubborn pet. As she focused on her task, a pair of white shoes appeared before her, tapping in that familiar two-half rhythm. To her dismay, the worst possible scenario had come true. Tunkum forced a smile as she looked up to see Kowloon, the very same annoying guy from before, standing there with a cocky grin. He looked every bit like someone who didn't care about the world, holding a can of Coca-Cola and idly chewing on a straw. He stared at her and shouted, "Tun Meo Khan." She pretended not to hear him and kept her head down. But he called out again, "Tun Meo Khan." People passing by heard the odd nickname and stopped to look at her. A warm hand tapped her on the shoulder. She flinched. It was Kowloon. Forcing a smile, she said, "How nice to see you again." Kowloon, clearly pleased with himself, responded, "Seems like we're destined to keep running into each other. I live nearby too." Stammering, she replied, "Sorry, I have something to do now. I'll catch up with you later, okay?" As she tried to leave, called out, "How much trash have you picked up today?" "Oh no, this idiot still thinks I'm a trash collector. Doesn't he realize from my outfit that I'm not?" She looked down at herself and was horrified. She was wearing a cotton tracksuit that was now wrinkled and dirty. After a sleepless night, clothes had turned into a mess, and she hadn't even combed her hair before running out to find her cat. No wonder Kowloon still thought she was a trash collector. Suddenly, she realized that this guy was her nemesis. Every time they met, something bad happened, and she always looked her worst. This jerk even seemed to enjoy watching her suffer. She tried to console herself, thinking, "It's not that big of a deal. I'm just wearing an old pair of shoes and some casual clothes. It's like I'm dressed for a basketball game." Back in the day, Kowloon loved basketball too, but he probably only played in second-rate games that weren't worth watching. Kowloon, his face flushed with excitement, said, "Meo Khan, it's great to see you again. How about we go for a drink?" She took a few steps back, regretting that she had never learned self-defense. It was the perfect skill, intelligent and useful in situations just like this. Kowloon stepped forward, raising his hand in a way that reminded her of scenes in movies where a mischievous guy teases a street vendor girl. Just then, Hukbao jumped out of the trash can, scaring Kowloon so much that he quickly pulled his hand back. The cat perched on the trash can lid, watching him intently. Sensing Tunkum's fear, suddenly leaped toward Kowloon with the speed of lightning. For a brief moment, she almost applauded the cat's agility, but the outcome was far from what she had expected. Instead of attacking, Hukbao lovingly licked Kowloon's lips. Initially, she had thought the cat would bite him to protect her. The cat gently licked the guy's pale face, leaving him frozen in fear. The cat's behavior was like a long-lost lover reunited with its beloved, a stark contrast to Kowloon's panicked state. He shouted, "Meo Khan, help me get it off." Tunkum quickly pulled the cat off and held it close. Kowloon, drenched in sweat, kept his hands raised in a defensive stance, trying to keep the cat at bay. "So you're afraid of cats?" Kowloon forced a weak smile and, trying to play it cool, said, "Who's afraid of cats? I just don't like animals with fur, that's all." Tunkum burst out laughing, noticing a bead of sweat slowly rolling down his face. She laughed even harder as she cradled Hukbao and walked away. It was such a satisfying moment. She finally felt like she had gotten some revenge. However, Hukbao seemed reluctant to leave, its eyes still fixed on Kowloon, who stood there paralyzed with fear. Once inside the restaurant, Tuncum couldn't help but replay the hilarious scene in her mind, but her laughter was interrupted by the ringing of her phone. "Hello, Tuncum. This is Look To Min." "Hello, what's the matter?" she asked. There was a long pause before he responded, sounding somber. "I just came from the hospital. Your friend Auntie, something happened to her." "Where is she?" "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "She's in a mental hospital," he replied. Upon hearing this, she felt as if she couldn't handle any more shock and slumped back in her chair. "Do you know why?" "She kept mentioning your friend who died, Lam Ti. She even tried to gouge out her own eyes, saying it was to give them back to Lam Ti. We had no choice but to restrain her and take her to a specialized ward. Treatment." His voice revealed his frustration as he explained that by the time he had arrived at the hospital, Auntie had already gone mad. She had been desperately trying to gouge out her eyes, and if the nurse hadn't intervened in time, she might have succeeded. As they took her to the hospital, she kept muttering the word gouge. Her pink fingers were stained with blood as she continued trying to claw at her eyes. The most terrifying part was when she started pulling out her own hair, as if someone were trying to scalp her. Look To Min, who had always been fearless, found himself chilled to the bone as he watched this gentle girl transform into something terrifying. He had witnessed many horrific events, but never had he felt the way he did this time. It was as if his whole body had turned cold. Seeing her bleeding, with her eyes torn apart, he only wanted to run away. He silently mocked his own cowardice. At that moment, his instincts told him that this wasn't just a simple suicide case. It was clear that someone had been targeting both Lam Ti and Auntie. There were no clues to follow. Frowning, he pondered the situation. When Tuncum expressed a desire to visit Auntie, he refused, explaining that her mental state was too unstable for visitors. The truth was, he didn't want Tuncum to suffer another shock. If she saw Auntie in her current state, it would hurt her even more than seeing Lam Ti's body had. Tuncum left the restaurant feeling dejected, wandering aimlessly through the brightly lit streets. She started to worry about Thi. What if something happened to her too? Lam Ti had died a horrible death. Auntie had been committed to a mental hospital. Lost in thought, she wondered if she would ever be able to smile again. At least she still had the little cat to keep her company. She walked home with her head down, passing through a dark street where the streetlights were out. The management should have fixed them by now. Suddenly, the cat in her arms started poking its head out, looking around as if searching for something. It squirmed as if trying to escape her grasp. She too felt as though someone was following her, but when she turned around, there was no one there. Her heart raced, and the recent events had made her more sensitive than ever. She felt as though some dark force was out to get her. Since childhood, she had possessed a strong sixth sense, often experiencing vague premonitions before something happened. Now, she felt danger lurking around her. Could there be a thief on this street? There was something odd about the street tonight. As soon as it got dark, the street was deserted, and the air was filled with the faint scent of blood. Terrified, she started running towards her home. Even though she couldn't hear footsteps behind her, Hukbao was just as frightened, its fur standing on end. She felt a heavy presence closing in on her. Suddenly, her vision blurred, and everything around her seemed to turn pitch black. She rubbed her eyes, but it didn't help. It felt as though something had flown into her eyes, causing an unbearable itch. She almost threw Hukbao to the ground to rub her eyes harder. Hearing the cat's meows, she realized she shouldn't do that. The cat also seemed unwilling to leave her arms, rubbing its face against hers to stop her from touching her eyes. But the discomfort in her eyes only grew worse. Just as she was about to drop the cat, the heavy pressure lifted and her eyes felt better. She forced them open and, under the faint moonlight, saw a familiar pair of shoes tapping in a two-half rhythm. For the first time, she didn't find the two-half rhythm guy annoying. She looked up at him as he sneered and said, "Tunmeo-kan, you're really something else. What kind of girl comes home at this hour? Your cat was adorable earlier. I wasn't scared of it. Let me explain so you don't think I'm a coward. My family has been famous exorcists for 3 generations. Continued to brag, and her gloomy mood began to lighten. Serves you right. That'll teach you to keep calling me a trash collector. Come thought. She decided to ignore him and continued walking towards her house. But Kalun wouldn't leave her alone. He kept following her, talking non-stop. She got so fed up that she held out Hukbao to scare him. He backed away, saying, "I'm just allergic to cats, not scared of them." Hukbao, now calm, seemed eager to jump into Kalun's arms. He couldn't blame the cat. After all, Kalun was quite good-looking. Kalun followed her all the way to her door. Tunkum rushed inside and locked the door, but she could still hear Kalun's voice from outside. "Free! Free!" She couldn't believe how annoying this guy was, pretending to be some kind of exorcist. After washing up, she climbed into bed. The day had been exhausting, and her nerves were frayed. All she wanted now was to relax. Before she knew it, she had fallen into a deep sleep. In her dream, she found herself walking through a dense forest, with mysterious sounds echoing around her. She moved forward, the leaves rustling underfoot, the moonlight barely penetrating the darkness. The mountain path was difficult to navigate, but the strange music kept pulling her along. Following the music, she came upon an ancient tree. Under the pale moonlight, the tree looked majestic, and it seemed the music was coming from there. Just as she was about to approach the tree, she heard a loud meow. Startled, she woke up, realizing it had only been a dream. When she turned her head, she saw a furry creature lying beside her pillow, and she screamed in terror. Her cry startled the creature, which turned out to be Hukbao. She sighed in frustration, glaring at the cat. Hukbao opened its big eyes and looked at her, making her heart soften. She gave up and let the cat do whatever it wanted. Tunkum woke up early to visit Tithi. As the saying goes, a sad person never sees a cheerful scene, and indeed, the gloomy sky matched her mood perfectly. As she was about to leave the house, her cat insisted on following her, so she placed it in a basket and carried it along. She thought that bringing the cat might help comfort Tithi. The taxi stopped in front of Tithi's house. A maid answered the door after hearing the bell. Upon seeing Tunkum, the maid said, "You arrived at the right time. The mistress hasn't been feeling well today. She didn't sleep at all last night. Something very odd." After handing the basket with the cat to the maid, Tunkum picked up Hukbao and walked straight to Tithi's private room. The entire room was engulfed in darkness. The curtains were tightly drawn and no lights were on. The atmosphere inside was stifling, making Tunkum frown. In the dim light, she could make out a figure sitting on the sofa. She knew it was Dung Tithi. She approached the window, intending to pull the curtains open. Tithi lethargically said, "Don't. I don't want to see the sunlight." Tunkum didn't pull the curtains and instead sat down opposite Tithi. Tithi was smoking, filling the room with thick smoke. Tunkum's eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness, and she noticed that Tithi's face was streaked with tears. Her lipstick had been wiped off, and the bags under her eyes indicated that she hadn't slept all night. Tithi didn't say a word, and as a close friend of many years, Tunkum knew that any attempt to comfort her would be useless. She felt defeated. The real question was, what had they been defeated by? In the span of a few days, one friend had died suddenly, and another had gone mad. How could they possibly accept this? Tunkum reached out to hold Tithi's left hand, only to find it was ice cold. "Tithi, why do you have the air conditioning on so cold?" Tithi sighed. "Maybe it's my heart that's cold. Why are all these misfortunes happening to us? It's strange, but today I feel a chill on my back, like there's a block of ice resting on it." Only then did Tunkum notice that Tithi was still wearing her qipao. In the dim light, the fabric seemed to emit a strange glow. "Come, you probably haven't seen Unki when she goes mad, have you? She pulls her hair up, as if some invisible person is lifting it. She keeps calling Lamki's name and saying that Lamki wants to borrow her eyes. Terrifying." Saying this, Tithi burst into tears and collapsed into Tunkum's arms, trembling as she spoke. "Come, I'm really scared. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm next. I'm so frightened." "What nonsense are you talking about? Why would you be next? Lamki committed suicide. Do you want to end up like her?" No, it's not that. Don't forget that I have a very sharp sixth sense. Ever since I was a child, I've been able to sense when something is about to happen. That's why we became such good friends. I really feel like I'm next. Tutankhamun felt overwhelmed. First, Lamti had died, then Unti had gone mad. And now Tithi was showing signs of instability. Out of nowhere, she started talking about her sixth sense. Tutankhamun wanted to curse the heavens for making her endure so much suffering. Tithi sobbed uncontrollably. Perhaps she had been under too much pressure. Tutankhamun didn't know what else to do but to keep patting her friend's back, trying to comfort her. She wanted to cry, but if she broke down now, who would protect Tithi? Slowly, Tithi leaned into her. At that moment, Hakbao, who had been resting in Tutankhamun's lap, suddenly jumped up. Tutankhamun called out, "Hakbao!" Hakbao stared at Tithi with hostility, growling threateningly as if it were trying to protect Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun lowered her head to calm the agitated cat and said as she held it, "What's wrong, Hakbao? Why are you upset? You mustn't bite people, understand?" She was forcing a smile to tease Hakbao when she suddenly froze. She saw something in Hakbao's eyes. Hakbao was a beautiful cat. It had large eyes, and the unique thing about it was that one eye was blue while the other was pink. Pink eye was particularly special, emitting a mesmerizing glow that had always been Tutankhamun's favorite color. But at this moment, that color became her worst nightmare. In the pupil of Hakbao's pink eye, she saw the reflection of Tithi. What was terrifying was that there weren't just one, two figures in the reflection. The other figure was perched on Tithi's shoulders, with its head resting on hers and its hands on her shoulders. It was the shadow of a long-haired woman. Frightened, Tutankhamun looked up at Tithi, who was sitting alone on the sofa, rubbing her eyes. She then glanced back at Hakbao's pink eye and still saw the two figures. She was so scared that she couldn't breathe. Body froze, and her mind went blank. All she could do was hold Hakbao tightly. The shadow of Tithi in Hakbao's eye became clearer. Tithi bent down to observe Hakbao, but Tutankhamun didn't dare look at her anymore. Trembling, she kept her gaze fixed on Hakbao's eye. Indeed, Tithi was carrying a long-haired woman on her back. Blood was dripping from the woman's pale arms, but Tutankhamun couldn't see her face. The woman's long hair was draped over Tithi's eyes, with some strands even poking into them. Sweating profusely, Tutankhamun stood frozen as the woman on Tithi's back began to move. She slowly raised her hand and made the gouging motion with her middle and index fingers. As if possessed, Tithi began to mumble, "This cat's eyes are so strange. I just want to gouge them out and see." At some point, Tithi had grabbed a fruit knife from the table. Tutankhamun was so terrified that her legs gave way, but she saw Hakbao leap up and pounce on Tithi, causing her to jump back in fear. Hakbao then jumped back into Tutankhamun's arms. Terrified, Tutankhamun looked at Tithi and, trying to stay calm, said, "It's getting late, and I have something to do. I think I'll head home now." Tithi didn't try to stop her, face pale as she replied, "That was so strange just now. Why did I have the urge to gouge out the cat's eyes? I must be going mad. How brutal." Tithi stood up, touching her back, and said, "I feel so cold on my back, and it feels heavy too. I'm going to the bathroom." Before entering the bathroom, she glanced at Hakbao, who stared back at her intently. In the pink eye of the cat, the figure on Tithi's back rested its head on hers, its hands around her neck. Tutankhamun quickly sat up straight, not daring to look into the cat's eyes anymore. She watched as Tithi turned back and said, "I don't know why, but my eyes are so itchy today, like something flew into them. I just want to take my eyes out and wash them clean." She gave an eerie smile before entering the bathroom. Seeing her lock the bathroom door, Tutankhamun let out a sigh of relief, scooped up the cat, and ran out of the house. As she opened the door, she bumped into the maid carrying a tray of coffee. She didn't even bother taking the basket with her and fled as fast as she could. She ran without caring for red lights, only stopping when Hakbao scratched her face, snapping her back to reality. Blood trickled down her face like red tears. If Hakbao hadn't snapped her out of it, she would have been hit by a car. Hakbao had saved her life. Standing on the street, trembling, she recalled how her grandmother used to tell her strange stories when she was a child, making her believe that many seemingly illogical things existed in this world. But believing was one thing, Seeing it with her own eyes was another. Now, her sixth sense warned her that Thi was in danger, and she would suffer the same fate. She didn't dare go back to save Thi because she was too afraid. She was utterly drained. All she could do was call Thi's maid and instruct her to keep a close eye on her mistress. She then hugged the cat, her savior, and hailed a taxi to take her home. She thought about that annoying guy who tapped in to have rhythm. Exorcist Kalung. Tun-Kum tore through her house, searching for Kalung's business card. Finally, she found it on the sofa. In times of desperation, one turns to anything for help. When she dialed his number, all she could manage to say were the two simple words, Kalung. On the other end of the line, a high-pitched voice responded, Mao Khan, you finally called me. Now you must believe that I'm not afraid of cats, right? She wasn't quite sure if she could trust him. Could he really be descended from a famous line of exorcists? So, things were worse than she thought. A short while later, he arrived at her house. As soon as she heard the doorbell, she rushed to open the door. Standing outside was a rather handsome man wearing stylish black sunglasses and dressed in a sharp black suit, carrying a large bag. Shaking her head, Tun-Kum opened the door for him, saying, I invited you here to exorcise ghosts, not to put on a mob boss fashion show. He didn't have to go to such lengths. Removing his sunglasses, he defended himself. Ghost hunting is just a hobby for me. My main job is being a handsome guy. Tun-Kum couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could someone be so shameless? Although still annoyed, she opened the fridge, took out a can of Coke, and offered it to him. Then she sat cross-legged on the sofa and began to recount all the strange events that had occurred in the past few days. She told him everything, and when Thi came back and invited everyone over, to her bringing the red fabric and making it into a qipao, then Lam Ti's death, An Ti going mad, and how Dun Thi was now being controlled by a ghost. Finally, she told him how she herself felt like she was in great danger. Kalung listened intently to everything she said. True to his reputation as a hereditary exorcist, he began to analyze the situation. When did you first notice something was wrong? He asked. It's hard to pinpoint exactly, but I really started feeling uneasy after Thi returned. Everything that happened afterward was just so strange. To be honest, it's quite simple. I think everything is connected to that red fabric, Kalung stated. Tun-Kum thought to herself that she had already figured that much out. Such a simple deduction could be made by anyone who had read a few detective novels. The moment she saw the shadow on Thi's shoulders in Huck Bao's eye, she knew the fabric wasn't ordinary. She remembered the old woman, Mr. Ho's mother, who had adamantly refused to let her son design the fabric. And then all the bizarre incidents that had occurred after everyone started wearing clothes made from it. She hadn't faced any danger herself, because she hadn't yet worn the scarf. The pressing issue now was how to help Thi and how to drive out the ghost woman. Sarcastically, Tun-Kum retorted, It doesn't take much intelligence to figure that out. Don't think we're all idiots who need you to show off and explain it to us. Kalung didn't seem bothered by her sarcasm and simply said, There's no point in talking about it now. We need to get to your friend's house right away. She might be in danger. Without hesitation, Tun-Kum grabbed Huck Bao. Kalung sprinted out the door, saying, Why are you bringing the cat? I'm allergic to them. You carry him. This cat is amazing. Saved my life multiple times. I'm not carrying it. I'm allergic. You take it yourself. Kalung pulled up in a very nice car. Kalung, where did you steal this car from? I didn't. It's mine. Poofs. Probably borrowed it from a friend just to show off. This guy would be lucky to own a bicycle, she thought to herself. Before long, they arrived at Dun Thi's house. Tun-Kum and Kalung quickly rang the doorbell, and the maid answered. Her calm demeanor reassured Tun-Kum somewhat. As if something had happened to Thi, the maid wouldn't have been so composed. However, what the maid said next left them at a loss. Half an hour ago, the mistress left the house after taking a phone call. Who called Thi? Tun-Kum asked. It was an old man's voice. He asked me to get the mistress to the phone, and after she spoke to him, she left right away. Tun-Kum and Kalung sat in the living room, waiting for Thi to return. They had no idea why she had gone out. Suddenly, something occurred to Tuncum, and she asked the maid, what was she wearing when she left? The mistress was still wearing that red chipao. She didn't want to take it off. Hearing this, Tuncum collapsed onto the floor. If she was still wearing that outfit, she would surely be in danger. I need to call the police right away. When Tuncum called Look To Min, he was looking through a stack of photos, trying to find clues related to Lam T's suicide. Hearing her sobbing voice on the phone made his heart ache. He decided to go to Dun Thi's house. Tuncum met him at the door and, along with Kalun, quickly recounted the story of Thi carrying a ghost and how she had now gone missing. After listening to her, Look To Min didn't jump to the conclusion that it was connected to the fabric as Kalun had. Instead, he took Tuncum's hand and started to lead her outside. Where are you taking me? He asked. To see a psychologist. You might be under too much stress and having hallucinations. Suddenly, he snapped back to reality, realizing that this man didn't believe her. He was a rational person, well-educated and a police officer, just like her. How could he possibly believe that she had seen a ghost? Talking about this would only cause her more harm. Realizing this, she calmed down. You don't believe her, do you? Halung spoke up on her behalf. Only then did Look To Min realize he had made a mistake. He should have offered words of comfort to the woman who had put her trust in him. But you couldn't really blame him. He was a logical person, not easily swayed by emotions. Her expression was hard to read as she pressed her lips together, her eyes showing signs of hurt. Maybe what she said was true, but this was all too bizarre to believe. Regardless, Tumin wasn't going to let this case go. By now, he was convinced that someone was behind this spreading fear, and that person might even be Dun Thi, the missing girl. Tuncum was determined to find Dun Thi. The problem was that the city was too big. Where would they even start looking? They sat waiting in the living room all day, with Kalun being the most relaxed. He spent his time admiring the house until the cat on the sofa chased him away. Then he pulled out a laptop from his bag. You're a digital age exorcist, huh? Tuncum teased when she saw him playing computer game. I'm practicing my ghost hunting skill. Practicing ghost hunting by playing video games. This guy has serious issues, Tuncum thought. As night fell, Look To Min took out his phone and ordered his subordinates to start searching for Dun Thi. He was violating protocol since not enough time had passed to officially consider her missing. He was growing increasingly anxious. Sitting in Dun Thi's house, he couldn't shake the feeling that the place was eerie, as if someone were breathing a cold draft on the back of his neck. The phone calls had been made and the search had begun, but there was still no news of Dun Thi. Tuncum, exhausted, fell asleep on the sofa. After dinner, Kalun also reclined on another sofa. Look To Min watched the two of them sleep peacefully. What struck him the most was how, as soon as Tuncum fell asleep, Hukbao jumped up to lie next to her, creating a warm, comforting scene. It wasn't long before Look To Min also gave in and fell asleep on the sofa. In the middle of the night, Tuncum was awakened by the sound of a phone ringing. She reached out for the phone and only heard laughter. In the dead of night, the loud, clear laughter sent chills down her spine. It was the laughter of a group of people. The laughter was soft and didn't resemble the shrill, eerie, "Return my life" cries of hanging ghosts in horror movies. Yet, it terrified Tuncum. One of the voices was hoarse, and it was familiar to Tuncum. Yes, it was Dun Thi's laughter. She remembered how Thi would laugh like that whenever she tricked Tuncum. The softer laugh was definitely Luke Angti's. She always liked to cover her mouth when she laughed. No matter how happy she was, she would only chuckle quietly, never laughing out loud. And the bright, cheerful laughter was undoubtedly Lam T's. Only she laughed that freely, with abandon. Tuncum often teased her, saying her laugh sounded like a proud hen clucking after laying an egg. Those laughs chilled her to the core. They were all laughing together, two living people and one dead. Suddenly, she heard a gentle voice calling her name, voice she had never heard before. Tuncum. The terror overwhelmed her, causing her to lose all sense of reason. Yet, there was something strangely familiar and soothing about that voice. Her vision began to blur as she clutched the phone tightly. In an instant, the surroundings changed and she found herself in a forest. Strangely, she couldn't see Luk Tu Min or Kalun anymore. The voice was very close now. She had been on this mountain path before. Didn't take much effort to find the small trail. The voice was coming from there. She just needed to follow the path up the mountain to reach it. Step by step, she followed the voice. It was getting closer now, so close, and the voice was so gentle, so pleasant to the ear. As it called her name, it was so enchanting. The voice was almost there. Listening carefully, she realized it was a woman's voice, calling her, "Tun, come here." Tun Kum walked straight towards it. Ahead of her was an ancient tree, its leaves rustling in the bright moonlight, which was so intense, it was almost terrifying. Just as Tun Kum was about to enter, she heard a cat screech. Her face suddenly stung, and she sank to the ground. Opening her eyes, she found herself back in Dun Thithi's house. Kalun and Luk Tu Min were beside her. She had walked all the way to the edge of the balcony, where below lay the dark ground. She saw the sharp, unfinished fence, gleaming like a pack of wolves baring their fangs, ready to devour her if she fell. As she regained her composure, she noticed Hukbao staring at her. Her face hurt, and when she touched it, she found blood. Kalun was standing there, muttering incantations while scribbling on a piece of paper. He didn't say anything, but she could feel that he was trying to comfort her. After a long silence, Tun Kum, trembling, slowly spoke. "I heard Dun Thithi and Luk Ang Ti laughing. They were with Lam Ti." Alun, who had just come down from the balcony, asked, "Lam Ti, is she the friend who died?" "Yes," Tu Min replied. He didn't like Kalun very much. His male instincts told him that this pretentious exorcist had a suspicious background. Kalun had a knack for ignoring the expressions of those around him. He seriously asked Tun Kum, "You heard ghost laughter on the phone, didn't you? How interesting. Too bad we didn't hear the phone ring." Tun Kum looked into his big eyes, feeling utterly lost. The three of them each had their own thoughts, and none of them dared to sleep again, afraid of hearing that eerie phone call. A terrifying call had almost cost Tun Kum her life. The long night finally came to an end. The new day wasn't particularly bright, but there was just enough sunlight to bring some comfort. And that's a wrap for part 2. I hope you enjoyed this chilling episode. Your thoughts and feedback mean the world to me, so please share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear how this story resonated with you. Don't forget to smash that like button, share this video with fellow horror enthusiasts, and subscribe to Horror Podcast Realm. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on the next bone-chilling tale. Thank you for being a part of this haunting journey with me. I can't wait to bring you more thrilling content in the upcoming episodes, packed with even darker and more terrifying stories. Until then, keep the lights low, stay curious, and keep exploring the shadows. Have an amazing day, and remember, the next scare is just around the corner. Take care, and see you soon. Thanks for watching.